While Europe was still reeling from the aftermath of the Great World War I and the devastating Spanish flu, one particular woman experienced a tragedy that would later deeply influence countless lives. Miranda, a talented scientist and the devoted mother of a young daughter, lived in a remote village so inconspicuous that it was barely marked on any map. That year, the devastating plague took from her the most precious thing she had, her beloved daughter Ava. The loss plunged her into a grief so deep that she eventually severed all ties to the outside world. Miranda wandered aimlessly through the surrounding forests and mountains, driven by the feeling that she might find an answer somewhere. One day she discovered a hidden cave, its entrance almost completely concealed by the rock. What she found inside would have sent anyone else running away in terror, but Miranda saw something in it that she couldn't let go of. In the deep darkness lay a massive black organism, growing like a pulsating network of roots. It shimmered faintly, as if a strange and ancient memory was slowly flowing through it. This mysterious organism was later known as the Megamycete. Miranda soon realized that this mold was doing something that completely defied all scientific understanding. It stored memories, those of anyone connected to it. In some samples she found fragments of thoughts, instinctive impulses, tiny shards of personalities. It seemed as if the Megamycete was a living storage device, and perhaps a bridge between life and death. For Miranda, this wasn't frightening. For her, it was hope. She began infecting animals with spores from the organism. Some died immediately, while others developed grotesque mutations, thickened, hardened layers of skin, unnatural movements, or distorted limbs that barely resembled the original animal. A few of them survived, but they behaved as if they were completely empty, as though the creature had ripped something vital out of them and replaced it. These early creatures were unstable and unpredictable, yet Miranda saw in them only necessary steps on the path toward the return of her beloved daughter Ava. Year after year she steadily continued her work while the world outside changed. Wars came and went, political systems collapsed and new ones arose, but Miranda remained alone in her quiet village with her research and the eerie organism that promised her new hope. In the very beginning stages, destiny eventually guided another highly influential researcher to this remote place. Oswald E. Spencer, a young, ambitious man from a wealthy British family, was in search of extraordinary biological phenomena. Spencer was not only intelligent, he was also someone who refused to accept the world as it was. He believed that humanity was in need of improvement, and that science had to be the tool to achieve it. When Spencer met Miranda and reviewed her records, he was fascinated. He saw the incredible power of the Megamycete and understood that this organism possessed the ability to change the very essence of life itself. Miranda explained to him how the fungus absorbed memories, how it could nest itself in foreign bodies, and how some infected animals became deformed, resilient creatures. Spencer listened to her attentively while simultaneously forming his own interpretation. For Mother Miranda, the Megamycete was a powerful tool of rebirth. For Spencer, it was proof that human evolution could be controlled. His stay with Miranda had a profound impact on him. It was the pivotal moment when he realized that what he truly wanted was not to fight death, but to fundamentally reshape humanity itself. But Spencer was not someone who could stay in one place for long. Eventually, he left the village with fresh ideas, new plans, and a grand goal. that stretched far beyond the scope of Miranda's personal quest.
I was destined to become a god, building a new world with an advanced race of human beings.
Towards the very end of the decade, Spencer began to receive several leads. They spoke of an exceedingly rare and almost legendary plant hidden within West Africa. This specimen was rumored to possess properties similar to those of the Megamycete, but even more fundamental and perhaps more powerful. Spencer organized a grand expedition and brought along two key scientists who would later play a major role in Umbrella's history. Dr. James Marcus, a brilliant but emotionally unstable virologist, and Edward Ashford, the scion of a distinguished family with a long and storied scientific tradition. Via trade routes that were already controlled at the time by the predecessors of what would later become the Tricell Corporation, the group made their way deep into remote regions. What they found there was like a discovery from another age. In a hidden cave, a single glowing flower grew. The locals called it the sundial, and its nectar contained a substance that surpassed anything Spencer had ever seen before. From this substance, the researchers isolated a virus that would later become known as the Progenitor virus. The very first experiments were absolutely shocking. Animals transformed into grotesque, unrecognizable versions of themselves. Some developed thick, hard, stone-like layers of skin that acted like heavy armor, while others grew twisted, massively overgrown bone structures that protruded painfully from their bodies. Some living organisms died almost instantaneously, while others became hostile, distorted creatures that were barely aware of their surroundings. Marcus was thrilled. To him, this was a scientific revolution. Ashford, on the other hand, was deeply disturbed, but Spencer saw only one thing, a power that could reshape the future of all humanity. When Spencer, Marcus, and Ashford returned to Europe, they established their first secret laboratories, clandestine spaces, often funded under false identities, far from any prying eyes. Marcus continued to deeply study the virus, Ashford meticulously documented every change, and Spencer observed everything with a steady gaze fixed far into the distant future, while the other two were still desperately trying to understand the destructive properties of the virus. Spencer was already actively shaping his own ideas. He realized that a discovery like the Progenitor virus could not remain confined to a small laboratory. They needed an organization, something larger, something that looked harmless but had enough power to protect the research, a company whose name would inspire trust, a roof under which everything was hidden, an umbrella, a shield. Umbrella? Spencer made his final decision in 1959. The vision was finally born, still invisible, still nameless, but powerful enough to transform the entire world. After the initial foundational years of research, in which Spencer, Marcus, and Ashford discovered the Progenitor virus and triggered the first mutations, a new phase began in early 1960, where their dark visions finally took on a tangible and concrete form. While the public remained unaware and suspected nothing, a vast network of power, dark secrets, and scientific obsession was slowly taking shape in the background. The hidden seed of what would eventually shake the world as the Umbrella Corporation. In 1960, the small town of Raccoon City experienced a technological boom that seemed only marginally significant to the founders of Umbrella. However, The electrification of the city by engineer Michael Warren laid the foundation for Raccoon City to later become Umbrella's central operations base. At that time, Warren had no idea that his later political career would unknowingly set him on the path of a man who modernized a city, while biological nightmares grew steadily beneath his feet. While Warren was supplying the city with electricity, Spencer was working to expand his influence. In 1962, he commissioned the renowned architect Gregor Trevor to design a mansion deep in the Arklay Mountains. Officially, it was supposed to be a luxurious estate, but in reality, it was a pretext to build an underground research laboratory filled with hidden rooms, secret passages, and mechanical traps that Trevor constructed with astonishing creativity. We learn about this in Resident Evil 1 Remake through Trevor's diary. Little did Trevor know that he was working on his own final resting place. As the long years went by, Spencer, Marcus, and Ashford significantly intensified their secret research. In December of 1966, they officially established the discovery of the Progenitor virus. Through conducting countless complex experiments, they now gained a deeper understanding of exactly how the virus alters living cells. However, these changes were rarely stable. Animals and human test subjects mutated in grotesque ways. Their bodies grew uncontrollably, tissue hardened, or they collapsed dead after just a few hours. Marcus in particular saw these initial mutations as definitive proof that their work was right on the very edge of a new era for humanity. His intense enthusiasm often made him forget that each one of these creatures had once been a living being, before Progenitor violently tore them apart and reassembled their structure. In the year 1967, these repugnant experiments finally reached their first tragic climax. The Spencer Mansion was at last fully completed. Lord Spencer invited George Trevor and his family to the estate officially to thank them for their work, but in truth, his real motive was to eliminate them. Jessica and Lisa Trevor, the wife and young daughter of the architect, were secretly detained there and used as test subjects for various experimental strains of the Progenitor virus. Jessica died quickly. Her body could not withstand the strain, her organs failed, and she left behind little more than proof of how deadly the virus was in its early stage. Lisa Trevor, however, survived the ordeal. But what remained was no longer the vibrant woman she had once been. Over the passing years, her physical form became hideously deformed. Her broken bones grew back crooked and jagged, her wasting muscles began to consume each other, and her skin appeared fused with strange organic lumps. Her regenerative abilities became truly uncanny. Even severe injuries did not result in death. Instead, her body slowly continued to distort, as if the virus was relentlessly and desperately trying to find forms that could survive. We're able to. In Resident Evil 1 Remake, we learn about this in Lisa Trevor's chapter. From then on, she wandered through the underground corridors of the mansion, a living sign of what could happen when you try to outsmart nature. George Trevor himself was locked away in one of the hidden rooms and died there. completely unaware that his architectural masterpiece would eventually become one of the darkest places in the entire history of bioweapons. Leave this place to me. Go on ahead. In 1968, the course of development finally took a different direction. The city of Raccoon ordered a large set of street cars from Europe, and the infrastructure continued to grow, creating the perfect environment to establish a company that would soon have its hands in everything. That year, the Umbrella Corporation was officially founded. The three founders, Spencer, Marcus, and Edward Ashford, presented it to the public as a pharmaceutical company. However, behind this facade was the true mission: the further development of biological weapons based on the Progenitor virus. But just a few months later, Umbrella suffered a major blow. Edward Ashford accidentally infected himself with the Progenitor virus. The virus destroyed his body at a terrifying speed. His death in July 1968 left a power vacuum in the Ashford family that his son Alexander had to fill. Alexander was a capable researcher, but he lacked his father's genius. He knew that his influence within the company was waning, and he desperately began searching for ways to save his family's position. In August of the same year, Spencer founded the Umbrella Training Facility, which was placed under the leadership of James Marcus. Marcus saw this as the perfect opportunity to further research the Progenitor. His experiments became increasingly more ruthless, and the number of test subjects grew. Creatures whose bodies burst apart in screaming mutations filled the laboratory tanks to the brim. Others developed elongated limbs, hardened tissues, or unnatural organs. These monsters were not weapons, at least not yet, but they were the raw material for what was to come. In 1969, Alexander Ashford began his secret project. Motivated by the humiliation that his father's death brought upon the Ashford family, he developed plans for a new research facility, an installation in Antarctica. At the very same time, he officially launched the ambitious Code Veronica project, which was specifically meant to restore his family's long-lost honor. In November 1969, the Antarctic Research Facility was finally completed. Just 2 years later, in 1971, Alexander's project reached its most critical point. As a result, 2 children were finally born, Alfred and Alexia of the Ashford family. They were not ordinary children. They were genetically engineered, designed from the DNA sequence of their ancestor, Veronica Ashford. Alexander hoped they would restore the family's long-lost prestige. Above all, Alexia displayed exceptional intelligence from an early age. Even Spencer and Marcus had her closely observed, wondering if something was truly developing within her that could surpass any of them. With their birth, an era of preparation came to an end. Umbrella now had structures, buildings, laboratories, research projects, and the first victims of an idea that was much greater than any of the men who had created it. And while Spencer was already thinking ahead, a new generation was beginning to grow underground, a generation that would soon shape Umbrella's future. In 1977, the Umbrella Corporation reached a significant new stage in its history. Two brilliant young scientists, who would later become essential to the future of the company, were called to the Executive Training Center, Albert Wesker and William Birkin. Wesker, who was always cool, precise, and deeply ambitious, observed everything around him with a steady gaze that never revealed what he was truly thinking. Birkin, on the other hand, was a naturally gifted researcher with a curiosity that bordered on obsession even at a young age. The two formed a perfect, albeit unequal team. Under Marcus's guidance, they began conducting initial structural analyses, carefully examining new virus samples, and developing the specific working methods that would later grant them absolute power over life and death. But while Wesker and Birkin were at the center of these events, something else was changing beneath the surface of Umbrella, something that no one noticed. Some of the early progenitor mutants began to show a sense of stability, a stability that was unlike anything seen before. Under certain conditions, their bodies remained functional, albeit distorted, as if they had reached a state between life and death. Marcus began to experiment in order to understand the cause. These experiments would later lay the foundation for the development of the first bioorganic weapons, even though at that time no one had yet uttered that word. In Antarctica, Alexia continued to grow up. Her observations of her father's scientific records were unexpectedly profound for a child her age. She understood connections that even experienced Umbrella researchers found overwhelming. Alexander knew that she was the family's only hope, and at the same time a risk he could barely control. By the end of the decade, Umbrella had grown into a massive organization with structures spanning across several continents. Each of the three original founders had their own specific focus. Marcus conducted intensive research, Alexander designed the airs and facilities, and Spencer controlled the entire operation from above. But in the shadows of their laboratories, creatures were growing that were slowly becoming more dangerous. In 1981, an event made headlines within the corporation that impressed even Spencer and Marcus. Alexia Ashford, barely 10 years old, completed her studies at a prestigious university at a speed that was considered almost impossible. Her intelligence was so extraordinary that even William Birkin, who was already regarded as a prodigy at the time, saw her as a rival. Alexia began working on her father's projects at an early age and demonstrated a precision and analytical sharpness far beyond her years. But while her brother Alfred enjoyed the luxurious side of the Ashford estate, Alexia saw research as something else, a tool to correct her family's past. She was well aware that the Ashfords had lost influence, and she was not willing to accept this disgrace. As early as 1982, Alexia took a step that even Spencer would have considered risky. She infected her own father Alexander with the T. Veronica virus, which she had further developed. But the experiment was unsuccessful. Alexander's body reacted uncontrollably, became hideously deformed, and lost every single trace of his humanity. The mutation was both cruel and unstoppable. This creature, once the head of the Ashford family, was later locked away in the cold dungeon beneath the family mansion. His voice was little more than a choking echo that reverberated through the cold stone, a living testament to how brutally T. Veronica could take over the body. For Alexia, this failure was no reason to abandon her research. She used the event to confirm her theory. The virus required an extended period of dormancy, a state in which it could completely merge with the host. Consequently, in December of 1983, she made a truly radical decision. She deliberately infected her own body with the T. Veronica virus and then voluntarily entered into a deep, years-long cryogenic sleep at the Antarctic facility. Officially, her brother Alfred later spread the false rumor that his sister had passed away. But in reality, Alexia lay frozen deep beneath the thick ice, surrounded by complex machines that preserved her body while the virus slowly reshaped her very DNA. It was the beginning of a transformation that went far beyond human understanding. While Alexia withdrew into her artificial sleep, Umbrella's research elsewhere accelerated drastically. In 1983, Albert Wesker increasingly sought Spencer's company. He began to question the corporation's goals more closely. His skepticism grew, but outwardly he remained the perfect employee, loyal, determined, and controlled. In 1987, Michael Warren took office as mayor of Raccoon City. Under his leadership, the city invested heavily in infrastructure, unaware that Umbrella had long been pulling the strings behind the scenes. Every modernization also meant another piece of control over the police, utilities, and politics. 1988 marked a decisive turning point. Spencer ordered Wesker to assassinate James Marcus. In recent years, Marcus had become increasingly unpredictable, had isolated himself, and his research began to diverge from the official projects. He distrusted Spencer and also felt suspicious himself. For Spencer, that was reason enough to get him out of the way. Wesker carried out the assignment. Marcus's body was disposed of and his laboratory was officially shut down. But Umbrella would later learn that Marcus could not be erased as easily as Spencer had believed. After his death, William Birkin took over leadership of the T-virus research. With his ambition and his ability to recognize unusual connections, he developed new variants of the virus that were more stable and could, for the first time, be specifically manipulated. The results of his research work formed the primary basis for one of Umbrella's most feared creatures, the Tyrant. These first Tyrant prototypes were truly monstrous beings with massive bodies, bulging muscles, and a strange pulsating life energy that seemed almost uncanny to those who saw them. Their hearts beat visibly beneath their skin, as if they could explode at any moment. Some specimens had oversized claws that could slice through steel like knives, while others developed reinforced skin that could withstand even heavy gunfire. But not all survived the transformation. Countless test subjects died during the metamorphosis, their skin rupturing, internal organs collapsing. A gruesome process that filled Birkin's laboratories. As these monstrous creatures grew, Umbrella in Europe began developing a brand new project, which, even in its earliest notes, was assigned a name that would later haunt the nightmares of countless people: Nemesis. By the end of the ER years, Umbrella still had the world firmly in its grasp, unseen and unchallenged. But deep within the laboratories, men and women were working on things that had long since crossed every moral boundary. The ER years were Umbrella's heyday. But with more and more experiments, ever more test subjects were needed, many of whom died during the tests. However, the local Raccoon City Police Department had long since fallen under Umbrella's influence and paid little attention to the bizarre deaths occurring around Raccoon City. Umbrella operated in the shadows and was still regarded by the public as a reputable pharmaceutical company. But as the public outcry grew louder, a special unit was formed to investigate the murders and the mysterious disappearances of Raccoon's residents. The Special Tactics and Rescue Service, or S.T.A.R.S for short, would soon become much more deeply entangled in Umbrella's schemes. Unaware, they investigate the murders and soon encounter a horror that only a few will survive. Where the hell is he going now? This way, press on. Here's where that went. In the early 1990s, Spencer's mansion was completed, and the pharmaceutical company Umbrella was also gaining more and more popularity with the public. They invested their money especially in the small town of Raccoon City. They established several schools and orphanage and provided support to the local police. What people didn't realize, however, was that Umbrella's secret research facilities were also expanding and operating underground all over the world. So Spencer not only had laboratories built in Raccoon City and in the Arklay Mountains, but the research facility in Africa kept expanding, and the facility in Antarctica also continued to grow, albeit under different management. However, the biggest secret project was a laboratory that only a few knew about, the Ark. The Ark was a top-secret research facility installed deep underground at a depth far greater than anything Umbrella had ever built before. Because the Ark facility was dedicated to a highly specialized and dangerous kind of research, the supervirus R.P.D, which was intended to render human subjects completely controllable. This research facility was Spencer's crown jewel, and it was so secret that even we only learned about it in Resident Evil 9 Requiem. Always by Spencer's side, a young researcher named Victor Gideon. He supported Spencer's vision, and we will learn more about him later. Umbrella's influence kept expanding and the funds kept getting larger. With this money, the mayoral election was also manipulated so that Michael Warren would be elected mayor of Raccoon City. Just as corrupt was Brian Irons, who was appointed chief of police. Umbrella had spun its web far and wide, but soon they made a small mistake that would change everything. After extensive testing on Umbrella employees, the Trevor family and orphanage children, the T-virus had finally reached its final stage of development. But to create a BOW, Umbrella needs combat data to sell its products. How long would a soldier last against a BOW? Survive? Rebecca. Back in 1996 it was Raccoon City, so a city that wanted to grow outwards but was already shaped internally by Umbrella's money. Under Mayor Michael Warren and Police Chief Brian Irons, a new unit was established that could operate independently and was not structured like regular patrol officers. S.T.A.R.S, Special Tactics and Rescue Service. Umbrella was not only a sponsor, but was officially named as a co-founder. The goal was to create a special unit that combined military experience and academic know-how in order to resolve terrorist situations and serious violent crimes more quickly than a normal police structure could. With its founding came the most important personnel decision. Albert Wesker, who had now worked his way up at Umbrella, was appointed as captain in 1996 and simultaneously took over leadership of the Alpha team. Of course, the Alpha team was not aware that Albert Wesker had already been working for Umbrella for years and was also involved in the virus research. This made him not only the team leader but also the public face of the new unit. At the same time, Enrico Marini led the Bravo team and served as deputy within the unit. Two teams, one commander, a structure that looked neat on paper but immediately created tension in practice because everyone on the team had a different reason for being here in the first place. Chris Redfield did not come from a typical police background. Instead, he came from the US Air Force. He had flight training, weapons experience, and that reputation that shines through in every biography. Strong convictions that often put him at odds with his superiors. In the Air Force, he served in the same unit as Barry Burton. Barry was older, more experienced, family-oriented, and in the way he worked, the exact opposite of Chris's stubborn directness. Precisely because of that, they worked together perfectly. When Barry joined S.T.A.R.S back in 1996, he recruited Chris to join him. This was not done as a simple favor, but because he knew that Chris was better off in a team of elite specialists than in the rigid hierarchy he had come to despise. Barry himself was not the man for first contact in S.T.A.R.S, but rather the man behind the weapons. In the Alpha team, he was listed as the weapons expert and backup man, someone who maintained and distributed the arsenal and in an emergency kept the others alive. And this is exactly where the dynamic that defines S.T.A.R.S as a team begins. Everyone has a clear role, but they don't just know each other from files, they share a history. Barry was even influenced by Enrico Marini during his earlier police career, before both ended up at S.T.A.R.S. This is how a new unit quickly became a web of relationships, loyalty, and silent tension. Jill Valentine fits this picture because she embodies exactly what S.T.A.R.S wanted to be on paper. A specialist instead of a standard career path. She had military experience. She completed intensive operations training and was especially skilled in bomb disposal and lockpicking. Later, she is listed in the Alpha team as a burglary and explosives expert. Her file also explicitly mentions that she was already well acquainted with Forrest Speyer during her military service. When Wesker recruited her to S.T.A.R.S in 1996, she wasn't joining a team of strangers. Instead, she was joining one where at least one face was already familiar, and she quickly connects with Chris. Jill requests shooting training from Chris, and Chris is happy to help her with it. This creates that classic Alpha Team feeling where people aren't defined by their emotions, but by their reliability in the field. The rest of the Alpha Team complements this structure like gears in a machine. Brad Vickers was listed as the pilot and computer specialist, the man who brings the unit into the operational area in the first place and provides them with technical support. Joseph Frost was responsible for vehicles within the team. That might sound trivial, but it isn't. In a unit that operates independently, logistics often determines whether you make it back home. And above everyone else stands Wesker as captain. Officially, he's the mastermind who brings the specialists together. Unofficially, however, he works for Umbrella to collect the combat data of the S.T.A.R.S. The Bravo team, meanwhile, was not a second string, but rather the other half of the unit led by Enrico Marini. His team was assembled in such a way that it could handle both field work and technical analysis. Rebecca Chambers, who was only 18 at the time, was assigned as a medic to the S.T.A.R.S team. Rebecca was so popular among the male S.T.A.R.S members that they exchanged her photo through a book. In Resident Evil 9, we can find the detailed library catalog and see the specific names of those who borrowed the book one after another, in which Rebecca's photo was hidden. A distinct individual copy can also be found in Albert Wesker's personal office desk. The other team members were Richard Icahn as communications officer, Forrest Speyer as vehicle expert and sniper, Edward Dowie as pilot, mechanic and sniper, and Kenneth Sullivan as the designated point man and chemist. That is no coincidence, but rather the concept.
This entire unit, starting from the beginning of 1996, continuing all the way through 1997, and lasting until the very end of 1998, a span of roughly 3 full years passed during this specific era.
S.T.A.R.S takes shape. Thus it becomes a unit that outwardly appears to be an elite police force, but internally is made up of people who each bring something to the table that cannot be expressed by rank. Chris's uncompromising attitude, Barry's protective instinct, Jill's precision, and the abilities of the other team members. In the spring and early summer of 1998, incidents begin to accumulate in the mountains outside the city. Reports of missing hikers, brutal deaths, and something that doesn't fit the usual criminal patterns. This is the moment when S.T.A.R.S stops being just a simple special unit and is on the verge of becoming the team that Umbrella will fight against for years. While the T-Virus reached its final stage in 1998 and William Birkin was already working on an improved variant, Wesker set everything in motion for the first operation in order to obtain the combat data of the S.T.A.R.S members. As already mentioned, Albert Wesker previously killed James Marcus, one of Umbrella's founders, and handed over his research results to William Birkin. But the situation escalated in several places. Umbrella's increasingly extensive tests required numerous test subjects, resulting in many fatalities among them. As a result, more and more bodies were found in the Arklay Mountains, and the local water supply was also contaminated by Spencer's facility. The young Alicia Ashcroft is the first reporter to follow the cases surrounding Raccoon City. In the Arklay Mountains, she comes across bodies that are pumped full of drugs. Alicia Ashcroft is an up-and-coming journalist and remains persistent in pursuing the case. She still doesn't know how deeply she will be drawn into Umbrella's machinations. When the supposedly dead Marcus suddenly reappears, Wesker wants to get him out of the way as quickly as possible. He sends out teams of agents to hunt down Marcus, and at the same time the situation is perfect to gather the first combat data for
an umbrella, is a portable handheld device consisting of a folding canopy supported by metal ribs designed to protect a person from rain or sunlight. It is a useful tool for anyone needing to stay dry during a storm or find some shade on a hot day.
Please go ahead and collect all of the items that you see scattered around in this area. Redeem the train. That is completely understandable. How much distance is there between you and the nearest industry lines?
In about 10 minutes, Stu. What?
Could you please explain exactly what has been going on here and provide some more detail? In July 1998, the S.T.A.R.S Bravo team is sent to the Arklay Mountains. Officially, the unit is supposed to investigate a series of gruesome murders that can no longer be solved like ordinary criminal cases. For Rebecca Chambers, this mission is the moment when training becomes reality. Everyone in the Bravo team still believes they're investigating a severe case of cannibalism. No one knows yet that they are already fleeing straight into Umbrella's experiment. The helicopter suddenly loses control and crashes in the forests of Arklay Mountain. After the crash landing, the pilot Edward Dewey stays behind at the helicopter while the others search the area. Rebecca continues through the forest and together with the other Bravo team members comes across an overturned military vehicle. In the documents, the team finds the name Billy Cohen, a former Marine officer who was sentenced to death and has apparently escaped. For Enrico Marini, the situation initially seems straightforward. A dangerous prisoner is on the loose, the escort is dead, so Billy becomes the prime suspect. Enrico splits up the team and orders them to
take some time to carefully look around and search this entire area for anything useful.
While Rebecca and Captain Enrico Marini carefully search for clues to the east, Forrest, Kenneth and Richard begin heading toward the northwest, drawing ever closer to the Spencer Mansion. Umbrella and Wesker's plan is working out even better than before believed. The Bravo team spreads out across the Arklay Mountains, and so a fight for life and death soon begins. Most of them are still alive, but they are no longer operating as a unified team.
A train.
After further searching, Rebecca comes across the Ecliptic Express, an umbrella train that has come to a halt in the middle of the forest. From the outside it looks abandoned, inside it has already become a rolling grave. Dead passengers lie in the compartments while others are rising again. For Rebecca, this is her first direct encounter with the horror she had only heard about until now.
What just happened? I thought they were dead.
On the train, she encounters Billy Cohen, the convict, At first glance, he seems like the man Enrico warned her about. Armed, calm, dangerous. Rebecca initially tries to arrest him, but it quickly becomes clear that at this moment they have more pressing problems than an arrest. Rebecca decides to trust Billy for now, albeit very skeptically. Meanwhile, Edward Dewey, who had stayed behind at the helicopter, is attacked and mauled by vicious, bloodthirsty dogs. With a leap through the shattered train window, he just barely manages to escape with his life. But these dogs aren't normal, it's as if they have rabies. They also jump through the window just as Rebecca enters the train compartment. Edward is severely injured, barely has any strength left, and can only warn Rebecca that there are monsters and undead roaming everywhere outside. But shortly after he unfortunately dies from his severe injuries, he is the first member of the S.T.A.R.S unit to lose his life. But a bit later on, Rebecca will cross paths with him once more. Not as a human, but as something else entirely. Rebecca and Billy continue to make their way through the train. When Rebecca is suddenly ambushed by a leech creature, Billy saves her life. This is the moment when their mutual distrust slowly turns into cooperation. Rebecca realizes that Billy is not the man the files make him out to be. Both of them even survive the attack of the giant scorpion Stinger, but that doesn't make anything better. The train suddenly starts moving again, races out of control, and finally derails in an underground station. From there, Rebecca and Billy reach the Umbrella training facility, which was previously run by Marcus. This place is the true core of Resident Evil 0. Here, for the first time, Rebecca truly understands how deep Umbrella's crimes go. The training facility in the Arklay Mountains was another part of Dr. Marcus's research system. James Marcus, a man who treated his students, employees, and test subjects like mere materials. The hallways are littered with the remnants of this past. In diaries, Rebecca reads about how employees became ill, changed, and eventually disappeared. Many of the headless creatures wandering through this area were once these very same people. This makes it clear, Umbrella didn't just create monsters. Umbrella sacrificed its own people long before Rebecca even arrived, came to Raccoon City. As Rebecca and Billy venture deeper into the facility, they are already being watched in the background. Albert Wesker and William Birkin are monitoring the events and openly discussing their intention to collect data. Wesker is particularly interested in the T-virus as a weapon and in observing the behavior of trained operatives under extreme conditions. That's exactly why they were sent to the Arklay Mountains in the first place. They are supposed to fight, die, and provide valuable information in the process. This makes Rebecca more than just a survivor once and for all. She is part of an experiment without ever having wanted to be. In the training facility, Rebecca and Billy continue to fight their way forward, and Rebecca learns more about Billy's past. When she confronts him regarding the story from Africa, which she knows from his file, Billy finally describes the details of the village massacre for which he was held responsible. He explains that he never wanted to kill civilians, but that his unit was acting under false orders and he was later sacrificed as a scapegoat. Rebecca listens to him and realizes that his story fits with what she has long since learned about Umbrella and its power structures. Blame is always passed down the line while the real culprits disappear. While Rebecca and Billy continue to fight, most of the rest of the Bravo team is still alive for the most part. Forrest, Kenneth and Richard, on the other hand, have followed a different lead and arrived at the Spencer Mansion. Before they arrive there, however, they are attacked by monstrous dogs and chased all the way to the mansion. During the attack, one of the Bravo team members has their arm torn off, or at least that's what is suspected. They manage to save their lives at the very last moment by fleeing into the mansion. There, they continue to search the mansion for clues. Captain Enrico Marini even radios Rebecca later on. He is alive and is also searching James Marcus's training facility. Shortly after, Rebecca and Billy go their separate ways until Rebecca reaches the underground facility. Here, Rebecca meets Captain Enrico in person once again. Enrico wants her to come with him, but Rebecca decides to look for Billy and join them later. Thus, Rebecca's path finally separates from that of the Bravo team. And at this point, Rebecca is completely unaware that she will never again see her comrades. At the end of the night, Rebecca and Billy encounter the actual true cause of the incident. The Queen Leech. This creature carries the memories of Dr. James Marcus within it. As already mentioned, Marcus was previously betrayed and murdered by Umbrella by none other than Wesker and Birkin. However, shortly before his eventual death, Dr. James Marcus permitted himself to be completely drained by leeches of his own recently developed virus strain. The resulting Queen Leech, possessing Marcus's memory and physical body, then released the Leech virus and attacked the passing train, and thus set the entire incident in motion in order to take revenge on Umbrella. This makes Rebecca realize that she did not stumble into a random accident. She is caught in the middle of an old power struggle in which Umbrella devours its own creators. In the final battle, Rebecca and Billy manage to exploit the Queen Leech's weakness. Light injures the creature. Rebecca opens the roof, Billy fires the final decisive shot, and the Queen Leech plunges into the depths as the facility self-destructs. Both barely escape, but for now the nightmare is finally over.
Hey there, Queenie. Why don't you come over here and feast your eyes on this? The act of killing represents the ultimate and final termination of a life. A profound moment that brings about an irreversible end to a living being's journey. It is a process that carries immense weight, often stemming from complex circumstances and leaving behind a lasting impact on the world that can never be undone or forgotten by those who remain.
When they finally stand outside together at the break of dawn, Rebecca sees the ancient mansion looming in the distance. That's exactly where Enrico is headed, and that's exactly where her own steps are now leading as well, in order to catch up with her team. Before that, she bids a final farewell to Billy. She takes his dog tag and makes the difficult decision to officially declare him dead. This is her last act of humanity in a night that has taken almost everything from her. Billy flees through the forests of the Arklay Mountains, and during his escape, he is apprehended by an Umbrella Special Forces team. He is captured, and over time, numerous tests are conducted on him, and thus the monster Nemesis is created. However, this part is only fan speculation and there is no real evidence for it. Since we don't know exactly what Nemesis was created from, the community has been speculating for years that Billy could be behind it. He is monitored by Albert Wesker throughout all of Resident Evil 0, and so Wesker could have known exactly where his escape would lead. Later, in Resident Evil 4, however, we learn that Luis Serra worked on the Nemesis project, and he was employed in the Umbrella Europe team. Therefore, the theory about Billy might not necessarily be correct. So we don't know exactly what path Billy took, however, he is never seen again. For Rebecca, the horror has come to an end for now. And since radio contact with the other S.T.A.R.S members has been lost, she heads alone to the mansion to find her comrades. She hadn't seen Forrest, Richard or Kenneth since the very beginning of the mission when the team first split up. However, as Rebecca slowly makes her way forward, she has no idea that her brave comrades are already fighting desperately for their lives. When Forrest, Richard and Kenneth arrived at Spencer's mansion hours earlier, they experienced something similar to the S.T.A.R.S Alpha team. They were chased by vicious dogs all the way to the mansion, and once inside they split up. Kenneth Sullivan took over the West Wing and began by investigating the dining room. Shortly after, he had his first encounter with one of the facility's monsters. He is bitten and does not survive the fight. Thus, Kenneth is the first one we can find as Chris or Jill in the mansion. He was eaten by the famous first zombie. Forrest Spire, heavily armed with a grenade launcher, really shouldn't have died so quickly. But he makes a crucial mistake that will cost him his life. He investigates the first floor of the East Wing and is attacked by mutated crows on the balcony. It is assumed that due to his heavy gear and lack of a secondary weapon, he stood no chance against the nimble crows. Thus he too dies in the mansion, and before long Jill will find her longtime comrade, her old friend who selflessly gave his life.
Take him! With you, I still can't believe it.
Richard, on the other hand, survives for a bit longer, but slowly gets lost within the Grand Mansion. After numerous difficult battles and reaching the very limit of his strength, Richard is suddenly ambushed by a giant mutated snake, bitten and severely poisoned. Covered in numerous painful bite wounds, he barely manages to survive and slowly drags himself into the antechamber. He is fighting for his life and won't make it without help. Meanwhile, Enrico Marini also arrives at the Spencer Mansion, and in Raccoon City, Wesker prepares the Alpha team. Since radio contact with the Bravo team had been lost, Wesker was able to use the Bravo team's search and the investigation of the other murders as the official mission plan, allowing him to continue pursuing his real agenda. Although Umbrella had lost James Marcus's training facility, the most critical and significant tests were still pending. The initial combat data for their masterpiece, the Tyrant, was not yet available for their review. While the Alpha team of the elite S.T.A.R.S unit deploys and soon lands within the dark forests of Arklay, Enrico has already fought his way to the mansion's outer garden, but he has not yet found any of his missing team members. Instead, he finds numerous pieces of evidence about Umbrella in the mansion, about their research. And he also discovers that Wesker is a traitor. Rebecca also reaches the mansion, but there is no trace of the Bravo team. She searches the house and encounters increasing resistance in the form of bloodthirsty monsters. As Rebecca is at the end of her strength, she locks herself in a small room to rest for a while. Meanwhile, during his search for a way out, Enrico has reached the dark sewers. But here he encounters the terrifying beasts from which he cannot escape. He is surrounded by hunters and severely injured. With his very last bit of strength, he just barely manages to save himself into the adjacent room. Enrico too is on the verge of losing his life, while Wesker is leading the S.T.A.R.S Alpha team straight into a nightmare that has only just begun. For Jill, Chris, Barry and the other Alpha team members, this initially seems like a routine search and rescue mission. They had absolutely no inkling that they would soon be facing the greatest horror of their lives. The Alpha team investigates the mysterious crash site of the Bravo team and is soon attacked by the same vicious dogs that had so brutally and severely injured Edward. When Joseph picks up the severed hand, weapon included, Joseph is unable to fend off the dog's attack, and thus he becomes the very first member of the Alpha team to die on the spot. Brad instantly starts up the engine of the helicopter and flies away to save his own life, while the other Alpha team members desperately flee toward the mansion. There, they initially believe themselves to be safe, but this night will change their lives. Whoa, where did he go? Whoa, here. Jill, I think you should go ahead and apply now. My body is covered in dirt and it feels very sore and painful. When Rebecca Chambers regains her consciousness, she immediately sets out once again to continue searching the mansion, hoping to find her missing team members, just as the S.T.A.R.S Alpha team does. She reaches the villa. Once they are safely inside, the urgent search for the missing Bravo team begins. While Jill, Barry and Wesker entered through the main entrance, Chris infiltrated the mansion from a different location. Wesker immediately splits up the team, not so they can search a larger area, but so he can continue his observations for Umbrella without being noticed. Wesker has known the mansion and its many corridors for years, which makes it easy for him to disappear quickly. Jill and Barry begin by investigating the dining room, which, for such a quiet place, seems rather lively. But in the very next room, Jill encounters horror. What Umbrella had created. Jill comes across the first mutated Umbrella employee who had also killed Kenneth Sullivan. He lies on the ground while the zombie attacks him. Kenneth had tried to secure evidence. He had his camera with him, wanting to document what had happened. His sudden death is incredibly abrupt, shockingly brutal, and occurs without any kind of warning at all. He is the very first member to truly show the world what has tragically become of the elite Bravo team. In this horrifying moment, it becomes painfully clear to Jill that the entire Bravo team has already failed their mission completely. What the hell is this thing? I found Kenneth killed by this thing. Let's report this to Wesker. While the team splits up, Chris Redfield eventually encounters Rebecca Chambers. For a moment, something like structure returns. Rebecca doesn't tell everything she has experienced, but enough for Chris to understand that this is no longer a normal mission. Rebecca is no longer the young medic she was just 24 hours ago. In just one night, she has learned to make the difficult decisions that others used to make for her. As Chris continues to search the house, he also encounters Richard Icahn. He is severely injured, poisoned by the giant snake that had attacked him earlier. Richard successfully managed to retreat, but his physical condition is now critical. Chris has to hurry to locate and find the antidote before Richard dies. Chris rushes to the storage room where he had also met Rebecca to retrieve the life-saving serum. But his efforts come too late and Richard dies in his arms. When Chris then faces the giant snake himself and defeats it, he doesn't initially realize that he has also been poisoned. Fortunately for him, Rebecca is able to prepare an antidote in time to save Chris. During this time, Rebecca Chambers has several encounters with Chris. She helps him not only medically, but also with finding his way around the mansion. At times, she almost seems like the more stable member of the team, even though she is the youngest. After all, she had already been through quite a lot that night.
I made it in time.
Barry Burton and Jill continue to go their separate ways, but something feels a bit off with Barry. He keeps appearing at critical moments, providing Jill with assistance, and then disappears again. On one occasion, he saves her life by freeing her from a dangerous trap. Another time, he seems strangely distracted, almost as if he is hiding a dark secret. His encounters with Jill are incredibly tense from the very beginning. He is certainly not the reliable and hearty comrade that Jill actually knows him to be in reality. Later on, Jill and Barry eventually find the body of Forrest Speyer on the balcony located on the upper floor. His body lies motionless in a corner, hacked apart by crows. But even he does not stay dead. His death is quiet, invisible, and that's exactly what makes it so frightening. No one was with him, and so it becomes clear. Not only was radio contact lost, the Bravo team had long since fallen and only Rebecca had survived. But there was still one hope, Captain Marini. Wesker, who was monitoring the S.T.A.R.S team from behind the scenes, knew exactly where Marini was. Deep beneath the mansion, on his way through the sewers, Chris then encounters Captain Marini for the last time. He knows that there is a traitor within the team. For a brief moment, there is hope that everything will finally be revealed. What happened to the Bravo team? But before he can say the name, he is shot. The shot comes from the darkness, and as we know, it was Albert Wesker who killed Enrico. Enrico dies instantly, and with him, the last chance to reveal the truth in time also dies. With that, the Bravo team is completely wiped out. Kenneth, Richard, Forrest, Edward, Kevin, and finally Enrico. Each of them dies completely alone, separated from the rest without ever saying goodbye. There is no final fight together and no sense of unity at the end. Only isolated deaths one by one in a system that was designed exactly for that. The only survivor is Rebecca Chambers, the youngest member of the team. While Jill continues to investigate the mansion, including the room of George Trevor, the architect who designed everything, she realizes how horribly Umbrella's employees were treated. And Barry Burton also increasingly falls under Jill's suspicion. He is acting somehow differently. Eventually, she realizes that Wesker is blackmailing Barry, because Barry had already started to track Wesker down earlier. However, Wesker had his family kidnapped to use as leverage against Barry so that his real plan would not be exposed. Barry was being controlled by Wesker, but tonight, teamwork is what matters. And so Jill manages to encourage Barry again. When Brad then makes contact via radio, there is a faint but distinct glimmer of hope that they might actually survive this nightmare after all. She also finds several clues about a secret laboratory hidden deep beneath the mansion, but she still doesn't know exactly how to reach it. Then, in a small garden shed, she is confronted with the next gruesome sight. Jill is attacked by a completely disfigured creature. It is Lisa Trevor, the wife of the architect who once worked so diligently for Umbrella. But George Trevor knew too many secrets, and so not only was he killed, but cruel experiments were also conducted on his wife. Jill manages to fight the creature away for now, but this won't be the last time she crosses paths with Lisa. Chris gets very close to uncovering Umbrella's trail and on his way to the laboratory discovers what Enrico wanted to tell him. Wesker is a traitor. But through his constant surveillance of the S.T.A.R.S. members, he knows exactly how much progress Chris has made. To prevent the plan from being exposed too early, Wesker captures him and locks him up in the underground laboratory. But Jill also uncovers Wesker's plan and finds out that Umbrella has been working on BOWs for years. In the laboratory, she also finds a special letter from a researcher named John. He is in love with a woman named Ada and describes how he wants to escape from the facility. Of course, this Ada refers to Ada Wong, whom we will meet later. However, it is clear that Ada is not in love with John, but is only using him to gain access to secret information about Umbrella. Wesker knows exactly that the S.T.A.R.S. team is slowly uncovering his secrets. He has William Birkin infect him with a modified T-virus sample even before he heads to the laboratory himself. Wesker reveals his true face, exposes his role, and unleashes the tyrant to collect the final data. At this moment, every illusion shatters. Wesker was never their leader. He was the one who guided them to this location, to test how long they would survive.
It's truly magnificent considering the significance of this entire situation. You know, I really hate saying our goodbyes. Mr. Barry.
At this point, Barry Burton reaches a pivotal decision. He finally takes a stand against Wesker. Not because he has suddenly found a new sense of bravery, but because he can no longer watch his team be sacrificed. In doing so, he resolves his inner conflict and finally chooses his comrades. When Wesker releases the tyrant, he is severely injured by it. But Wesker is far from dead.
unbelievable. Jill and Barry together. So you really want me in hell? Is that what you're saying? I can't believe this after everything we've been through. Through! Time. No, Barry! You viral cultured freak!
Jill frees Chris, and together they successfully make their escape from the mansion. Jill ultimately defeats the tyrant, and at the end, Brad tosses down to her a rocket launcher. With that, the tyrant is finally blown to pieces. The facility begins to crumble and the handful of remaining survivors flee. Rebecca Chambers is thus the only survivor of the Bravo team. The Bravo team no longer exists. The Alpha team is shattered, but Umbrella's plans are nowhere near being fully thwarted because the mansion was merely the terrifying beginning of this nightmare. The T-virus continues to spread and is rapidly on the verge of reaching Raccoon City. The mansion and James Marcus's training facility have been destroyed. But hidden deep inside the secret laboratories beneath Raccoon City, William Birkin is already meticulously developing a new virus strain, the G virus. Jill Valentine, who had survived the events at the Spencer Mansion, still hadn't escaped this nightmare inside. In her diary, she recorded how much the memories of the Spencer Mansion haunted her. Again and again, she saw a lot of blood and terrifying zombies in her dreams. For her, the horror from the Arklay Mountains was far from over. It had only taken on a different form. Chris Redfield also knew that the incident was not over. He and the remaining group of survivors confronted Police Chief Brian Irons and reported every single detail of the horrific events that had transpired, but without a lab, without the mansion, and without any solid evidence, Umbrella remained officially and legally untouchable. The corrupt Brian Irons quickly ensured that the entire case was closed. Chris quickly sensed that very few people in Raccoon City were willing to openly talk about the truth. Umbrella's influence ran too deep in the city, and too many people had been bribed by Umbrella. At the same time, Jill noticed that Chris had changed. His anger was deeper than usual. When an officer accidentally spilled coffee on him, Chris attacked him and was subsequently suspended. Later, in the middle of the night, he called Jill over to his apartment. There he showed her scraps of paper with information about the G virus, everything he had found out. For Chris, it was clear that Umbrella had to be stopped, even if he ended up standing alone. Jill was not only shocked by what he had discovered, but also deeply hurt because she hadn't been brought in much sooner. She wasn't willing to just stand by and watch while Chris threw himself into the next fight without her. But deep underground in Raccoon City, further preparations were already being made, showing just how far things had already progressed. Brian Irons met once again with William Birkin at the sewage treatment plant, the place where many of Umbrella's secrets had been covered up. There, Irons threatened the facility manager even with his service weapon when he refused to carry out his duties. Birkin, in turn, made it clear to the man that the media and police had begun to investigate Umbrella's activities more closely, and that it was important to destroy the last pieces of evidence as quickly as possible. At the same time, the police were receiving more and more reports of monster sightings in the vicinity of Raccoon City. These cases are documented by Alicia Ashcroft and published in the newspaper Raccoon Today. Chris, on the other hand, had known for a long time what this meant. The virus continues to spread. For him, it was clear that Umbrella was behind everything, and that the infection from the Arklay Mountains was far from being the end of the story. In his last diary entry, Chris finally writes that he, Jill and Barry had discovered the G virus during their investigations. He finally believes he has evidence in his hands that could be used to convict Umbrella. Precisely for that reason, he didn't want to tell his sister Claire anything about it. He wanted to keep his sister out of the danger zone and thus protect her. That night he sets out. Chris secretly leaves during the night and takes Barry with him for support without informing Jill of his departure. Shortly afterward, however, Jill learns that Chris had left for Europe and intended to target Umbrella's European headquarters with Barry. With this decision, Chris also wants to protect Jill, but for Jill the nightmare is far from over. This pandemic has spread faster than any disease in modern history. Angry mobster. The public is cancelling more trips. There are fires, there are people who... He was struck in ignorance. A state of urban ignorance was declared. The CDU has passed the underground region of the USA. Commitment, honesty, integrity. These are the core values that create the foundation for Umbrella. Commitment, honesty, and unwavering integrity, these are the essential core values that create the very foundation for the Umbrella Corporation. Could this mysterious person possibly be interpreted as Victor Gideon, the individual who also managed to escape from the destroyed laboratories? Meanwhile, at the Raccoon Central Hospital, numerous cases of a strange and unknown illness began to rapidly accumulate on September 10th. Cases of a strange illness. The chief physician describes the symptoms of those patients who, in reality, were already infected with the T virus. Their skin peels away from their bones and the fever cannot be reduced. The patients suffer from severe convulsions and bleeding eyes. The hospital keeps filling up and the conditions continue to deteriorate. Day after day until the 22nd September, when the city finally collapses. This is Agent HUNK. We have successfully retrieved all the G samples. The mission has been successfully accomplished at last. I feel a profound relief realizing that this remarkable creation, which I have poured my heart and soul into, is ready to serve its purpose and save me from the dangers I face. I know my hard work was not in vain, as my invention will provide the safety I need to move forward. That's right, the laboratories in Raccoon City. Their skilled leader, HUNK, the Grim Reaper. HUNK and his team tracked down William Birkin, who had fanatically continued working on the dangerous G virus in his hidden laboratory. They don't want to kill him, but merely secure the virus samples for Umbrella, because it's already clear that the city is doomed. Umbrella had not only bribed many useful positions within Raccoon City, but also the government. They were involved as well, as we learn in Resident Evil 9. At this point, it was already clear that the city had to be destroyed in order to protect the secret LPS project of the ARK facility. When HUNK and his team confront Birkin, a sudden noise occurs. As a result, Birkin is accidentally gunned down with the MP5. His briefcase containing samples of the T-virus and the G-virus is confiscated. Even as he is dying, Birkin injects himself with the virus in his chest. The effects do not set in immediately, and his wife Annette finds Birkin while he is still dying. Still obsessed with the G-virus, he soon begins to transform. What on earth have you done? She is actually... The person we are currently focusing on is a man who is widely known and referred to by the name of William. He transforms into his own creation and pursues HUNK's team into the sewers, where he wipes out most of the team. Birkin smashes the containers with the T-virus and the biological toxin enters the water. HUNK is not dead. He manages to survive Birkin's attack and subsequently fights his way out of the sewers, free. The complete backstory for HUNK can be found in the channel up to Resident Evil 9 Requiem, but it's too late. Infested rats pick up the virus and carry the dangerous infection throughout the city. A hidden laboratory accident thus turns into a catastrophe that can no longer be stopped. Panic also breaks out in the lab itself. Hunters break out, hunt through the corridors, and kill numerous scientists until someone manages to lower the temperature and at least temporarily stop the creatures. This also creates the freeze point in the laboratory from Resident Evil Outbreak and Resident Evil 2. But most of the scientists die anyway, and the laboratory becomes a mass grave. At the same time, Brian Irons is increasingly losing his mind. In his diary, he writes about the outbreak, but his reaction is not that of a man who wants to save the city. He locks escape routes in the police station and seems ready to drag everyone down with him. He personally shoots several police officers after he had snuck up on them. The station, which was actually supposed to provide protection, becomes a place of madness under his command. He locks himself in his office as he already knows that the city will fall. Then chaos reaches the everyday life of the city. During a football game between the Raccoon Sharks and the Old Court Thunders, mass panic breaks out when a single zombie goes on a rampage in the stadium. 50 local police officers are dispatched to that specific scene, but by then the situation is already out of control everywhere. And numerous citizens are turning into zombies. At the same time, in Jay's bar, 8 ordinary residents of Raccoon City, Officer Kevin Raymond, David King, and Alicia Ashcroft, the well-known journalist. They are joined by Yoko Suzuki, Cindy Lennox, George Hamilton, Mark Wilkins, and also Jim Chapman. These individuals are not elite soldiers. They are not highly trained special agents, and they are certainly not heroes with any grand plans. They are people who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. When zombies attack the bar, their only option is to flee into the streets of a city that is already beginning to turn into a mass grave. While the remaining officers of the R.P.D. try to evacuate as many residents as possible, numerous officers die in the ensuing panic. Nevertheless, the R.P.D. does not give up. A plan is formed to disperse a massive horde of zombies on Main Street using explosives. Meanwhile, the 8 survivors from Jay's bar are separated during their escape. Some of them make it to the Apple Inn, others end up near the zoo. The Apple Inn is already in flames after a boiler and a tanker truck have exploded. There is no safe place there either, only new detours and new deaths. Meanwhile, the situation on Main Street is escalating. The 3 police officers, Elliot, Eric and Harry, are working under intense pressure to rig the street with explosives. But before everything is secured, zombies attack the barricade. Elliot and Eric are killed. Only Harry can be saved as some of the survivors arrive just in time. Together, they manage to carry out the plan to the end. The charge on Main Street detonates, taking numerous zombies with it. For a brief moment, it looks as if the city still has a chance. But even that is only a short reprieve. Meanwhile, other desperate survivors are still hoping to be rescued by an evacuation helicopter at Raccoon Zoo. But the only way there leads directly through a dangerous area where a massive infected elephant and several hungry lions are currently roaming. Even the animals have long since become part of the nightmare. The escape through the zoo continues all the way to a train station. There the survivors come across a train that at first promises hope, but even that hope is destroyed when a rescue helicopter crashes nearby, taking 40 refugees to their deaths with it. Police and the National Guard continue their efforts to contain the city's chaos. Their mission is noted. Then, on the night of the 25th of September, the army sealed off the streets of Raccoon City, and the city was completely isolated from the outside world. Anyone still inside is on their own. On the 26th, the situation at Raccoon General Hospital is just as hopeless. The chief physician writes in his diary that most of the doctors and patients have already fallen victim to the zombie attacks. He already feels the first painful signs of infection within himself. 3 weary survivors reach the local hospital, hoping to find some medical supplies there. Dr. Harsh helps them, but he is tragically killed shortly afterwards by a lethal ledgeman. Beneath the hospital, a colony of leeches is already growing in the sewers, which originated from the remains of the incident involving James Marcus. The survivors eventually find a path through the sewer tunnels and come across a message left by an Umbrella employee. From this, it becomes clear that the hospital is connected underground to another facility. Even in what still appears to be a normal part of the city, Umbrella's secret paths and facilities reach deep beneath the surface. So the hospital was always part of Umbrella's plan. Meanwhile, helicopters are circling over the burning and dying city, deploying units of the UBCS. But the vast majority of these brave men die within a few short minutes. Only the UBCS members Carlos Oliveira, Michael Victor, and Nikolai Gionov survive the onslaught. They successfully manage to make their escape into the subway, where they are able to securely barricade themselves for the time being. At the local police station, all remaining forces gather for one last counterattack. A busy street is barricaded in an attempt to stop the spread of the infection. But the zombies overrun this position as well. The police officers present there are eaten and die a painful death while trying to save the city. The survivors from Jay's bar slowly navigate their way from the city sewers into the underground subway tunnels. Right there, their paths cross with dark new secrets from the Umbrella Corporation. The rogue researcher Monica suddenly shoots another Umbrella employee, steals a deadly sample of the G virus, and attempts to escape the facility using the underground subway. Later on in the story, she decides to use the train at the marshalling yard and steals Yoko's ID card for this specific purpose, because Yoko is actually a former Umbrella employee. She had only pretended to be a student. Yoko has strong computer skills and used to work in the underground laboratory under William Birkin, so she is very well acquainted with Umbrella's various projects, and according to her backstory, she was even directly connected to the Tyrant project, because she was among those who provided the original cell samples for Umbrella's research. Before Monica can get any further, she is suddenly attacked by a giant moth and impregnated by an undeveloped embryo that escaped from a broken capsule. The remaining survivors activate the temperature control system to slowly thaw out the elevator to the marshalling yard. But in doing so, they also thaw out the hunters at the same time. After taking the elevator ride up to the top, they must face the fully grown creature that had previously burst out of Monica's chest as a larva. It is a desperate fight for life and death, which is a common sight no matter where you look in Raccoon City. Right here in this specific spot, we can take a moment to look around and see exactly what is happening in the environment at this very time. If you take a look right over there in that specific direction, you will see exactly what I am talking about. while HUNK continues to fight his way to the helicopter to secure the G-virus samples, further collapses of the city's defenses are being reported throughout the city. 12 people are injured when zombies break through the western barricade. At the same time, the licker is sighted for the first time and receives its name from the surviving police officers. This monster is different and even more dangerous than any zombie. Eventually, some survivors reach the R.P.D. building. There, they meet an officer named Marvin Branagh, who is still desperately trying to get at least some remaining officers and civilians to safety. Marvin is also searching for his daughter, but this overwhelming chaos makes it nearly impossible to look for her. His daughter is currently on her own and trying to reach the police station. She flees through the contaminated streets of Raccoon City, but the little girl doesn't stand a chance on her own. And so in a dark, secluded back alley near the Kendok gun shop, she is viciously attacked and ultimately killed by zombies. While Marvin still holds out hope of surviving this day, his colleague Rita is sent out to organize some much needed help, but Marvin needs additional support and resources in order to even carry out the escape plan. And the other survivors help him with this. Rita gets help from Harry outside the station, while Marvin makes sure that everyone is to meet outside. But before the escape can succeed, zombies break through the barricade and attack Marvin. Marvin is seriously injured, but he is still far from being dead. The other 3 police officers are also either critically wounded or perhaps even infected. Rita and Harry do eventually manage to secure a van that the survivors could have used to escape, but Marvin urges the others to leave the area without him. He stays behind, also hoping to find his missing daughter, and bravely faces the remaining zombies alone. Badly injured and bleeding, he drags himself into the station's offices, where he finally collapses. I'm not actually dead yet. September 28th. Sunshine. The monsters have taken over the city. Somehow I'm still awake. While ordinary citizens all over Raccoon City are fighting for survival, the well-known struggle of Jill Valentine is also unfolding. She too is trying to escape from Raccoon City, but this escape is unlike anything she has ever experienced before. Even in her apartment, she's attacked by an overwhelmingly powerful monster, Nemesis. Nemesis is not a normal tyrant, but a T-103 based tyrant with a Nemesis Alpha parasite, which has enhanced its intelligence and tracking abilities. Nemesis is one of the 6 T-103s that were dropped over the city by Umbrella, with the mission to specifically hunt down the surviving S.T.A.R.S members. T-0, who later hunts Leon or Mr. X, by the way, is also one of the 6 T-103s that are deployed throughout Raccoon City. In the chaos of Raccoon City, Jill encounters Brad Vickers, the pilot from Resident Evil 1. Although Brad and Jill initially manage to make their escape while they are making their way to the police station, Brad is tracked down by Nemesis and killed right before Jill's eyes. Jill quickly realizes that the police station is already lost and that most of the officers have already turned into monsters. Here she also finds Marvin, who is however unconscious. Because of his severe injuries, Jill leaves him behind, assuming that there is nothing more she can do for him. She continues to flee toward the subway and there meets Carlos Oliveira, Mikhail Victor and Nikolai Jornev. But Jill realizes that something is wrong, because Nikolai is acting suspiciously. And since the UBSC was sent by Umbrella, she only trusts the whole team as much as she has to in order to escape the city. Carlos tells her about the evacuation plan at St. Michael Clock Tower, and that a helicopter would land there as soon as the bell rings. But to get there they have to take the subway, which Jill then manages to get running again. They do manage to get the subway moving, but Nemesis continues to pursue Jill and is not as easy to kill as the monsters Jill has faced so far. As Nemesis gets closer and closer, the UBSC soldier Mikkel sacrifices himself with a hand grenade in an attempt to stop the creature. He manages to push the creature back and sacrifices himself to save his comrades and Jill. Jill reaches the clock tower, which by the way is one of the most important locations in Resident Evil 3. And in the remake it was simply cut, no one knows why. Because here Jill fights with all her strength to reach the bell tower, and she even manages to ring it. But just as hope for rescue appears and the helicopter comes into view, it is hit by a rocket fired by Nemesis. Thus, for Jill and the other survivors, all hope of leaving the city easily is lost. The evacuation plan has failed, and instead it leads to the inevitable confrontation with Nemesis. Jill faces the overwhelmingly powerful enemy and at first manages to defeat him. But just as Jill believes she has defeated Nemesis, she is infected by one of his parasites, which transmits the T-virus to her. After she suddenly loses consciousness, Carlos desperately rushes her to Raccoon City Hospital, while a young and inexperienced rookie officer sets out for Raccoon City, as everyone else is fighting hard to escape the city. And a young woman is also riding her motorcycle toward Raccoon City, unaware of the nightmare she is about to plunge into. on September 29th, Leon S. finally arrives. Kennedy and Claire Redfield reach the dying city. Claire is searching for her brother Chris, with whom she lost contact because he went to Europe and cut off all communication to protect Claire. Hardly having arrived, Leon is attacked while examining a corpse. The mass of undead forces him to flee, and in an alley he encounters Claire. He saves her from an attacking zombie, and together they flee to the R.P.D. in a police car. But even this short drive ends in chaos. A zombie in the back seat attacks Leon. The vehicle crashes into a lamppost and a mutated truck driver plows into them. The explosion separates Leon and Claire, so both have to find their way to the police station on their own. On his way to the R.P.D, Leon also encounters Robert Kendo in his gun shop. But even there, the zombies break in, and Robert Kendo is killed. Robert Kendo was, among other things, the weapons specialist for the S.T.A.R.S unit. He produced special weapons tailored to each individual user. That's how Jill, Wesker, and Chris each received their own weapons specifically designed for them. In total, there were 8 Samurai Edge models, each specially customized for their users. He also wrote a book, which we can also find in Resident Evil. Upon arriving at the R.P.D, Leon Kennedy meets Marvin Branagh, who had survived for several days with severe injuries. For the last time, Marvin offers his help and informs Leon about what has happened. But when Leon meets him again later, the last great hero of the R.P.D has also fallen. Marvin Branagh, who had saved so many people, has now mutated into a zombie. At the R.P.D, Claire and Leon meet again later and realize that Chris had already left the city a month earlier. For Claire, this means her only clear lead is gone. They now know only one thing: they have to get out of the city alive. But even in the station, there is no longer any safety. A T-103, the T-00, is dropped off by helicopter and begins its hunt. Claire encounters Sherry Birkin and Brian Irons. Through a secret room in Irons' office, they initially manage to escape, but Claire also witnesses Irons' death there.
It must be trying to cover its tracks right now. But if I really have to go, then I'm going to take you along with me. I just cannot find a way to deal with all of this nonsense anymore at the moment.
Meanwhile, Leon encounters Ada Wong, who is searching for Ben Bertolucci because he is said to have incriminating information about Umbrella. Ben, like Alicia Ashcroft, is an investigative journalist in Raccoon City. He had previously uncovered clues about Umbrella and Brian Irons and exposed some of their dark dealings. At the very beginning of the outbreak, Ben locks himself in a cell at the R.P.D because he thinks this is the safest place. So when we meet him later with Leon and Ada, he has already been locked in the cell for more than a day. Additionally, Alicia Ashcroft shares her knowledge with Ben, and in doing so, learns quite a bit about Brian Irons herself. What Leon doesn't know is that Ada Wong is a double, even triple agent working for Umbrella but also for Wesker. She uses Leon to achieve her own goals, namely to obtain a sample of the G-Virus. She is also searching for John, an Umbrella employee. John is the researcher we met in the first part of the Umbrella lore. He had fallen in love with Ada, but in reality, Ada only used him to get information from Umbrella. But John had already died a long time ago in the mansion after he turned into a zombie there. Since Ada's lore in this part also becomes quite complex and remains relatively complicated later on, maybe it would be a good idea to make a separate video about it. What do you think about that? Around the same time, the Grim Reaper, that is HUNK, fights his way through the police station, severely injured, and with his last ounce of strength he manages once again to escape death. He is one of the first survivors to secure a sample of the G-Virus. Meanwhile, Claire and Leon are attacked by a giant mutated alligator. Claire eventually also encounters Annette Birkin, who explains that William Birkin has become a horrific creature. Claire and Sherry continue on with a cable car and eventually reach the other side of the facility. There, their paths cross once again with the horror that Birkin has unleashed. Claire and Sherry reach the transport elevator and make their way to the factory. Leon and Ada also use the elevator and are attacked by Birkin but are able to fight him off for now. Claire and Sherry are also attacked by Birkin during an elevator ride. Later, Sherry falls ill because the G-Virus is in her bloodstream, and Claire brings her to safety. Annette explains to Claire how an antidote for the G-Virus can be produced. When the self-destruct system is activated, everything comes down to one final escape. Annette is killed by William, but shortly before her death she shoots at Ada, who then falls over a railing into the depths. Leon believes he has lost her.
I know that I really hurt you, and it's honestly just not worth it anymore. Do it. So live your life, Leon! Oh no, wait!
In the finale, Claire has to face William Birkin once more and is able to defeat him afterwards. Meanwhile, Leon is attacked by the T-00 in its final form. Ada regains consciousness and throws Leon a rocket launcher with which he destroys the Tyrant. Finally, Leon, Claire and Sherry manage to escape by train before the facility is destroyed. The end has finally arrived at this very moment. This is the conclusion we have all been waiting for, and it is happening right now. We are calling for the absolute and undivided attention of every single citizen. Please listen carefully to this urgent announcement. The time of the end is upon us this instant, and we require all citizens to pay attention immediately. This is the final moment occurring now, and it demands the full focus of the entire population. The missile strike on Raccoon City is in a few hours. The operation aims to eradicate all biomatter. You won't survive if you stay. October 1st? No. I need you to repeat that right now. That simply cannot be true. On the 1st, on October 1st, Jill Valentine regains consciousness. She had been unconscious for 2 days after fighting Nemesis and becoming infected. Carlos had obtained an experimental antidote and cured her with it. Together they discover that Nikolai is a traitor. Jill and Carlos eventually reach the incineration and disposal facility P-12A. Nikolai escapes by helicopter, leaving the two behind. Jill manages to kill Nemesis once and for all. And at the last moment, they are rescued by Barry Burton in a helicopter. Listen closely. Next time you have the chance, you must push hits much harder for specific information regarding the T-virus and locate the necessary research documents required to produce a life-saving antidote. Meanwhile, a former Umbrella employee named George Muller decides to release the deadly tyrant Thanatos in a desperate attempt to prevent Umbrella's elite special forces from successfully killing him. Thanatos wipes out the entire team in a matter of seconds, but in the end, Thanatos dies from contact with the antidote, which ironically was made from his own blood. The civilians are able to escape with the help of the Raccoon Fire Department. Help me, please. I am slipping and I cannot hold on much longer. I am going down and I really need someone to reach out and grab my hand right now before it is too late. At the same time, David King and two other survivors search for medical supplies in an Umbrella facility. There, they encounter far more than they expected. The researchers, Carter and Linda, are trapped inside the facility while hunters roam the building. Because of this, Carter has released the Tyrant R, who is actually supposed to protect them. But the creature rebels, kills Carter, severely injures Linda, and destroys the only sample of an antidote. After escaping through the sewers, the survivors are attacked on the street by the Umbrella mercenary Arnold. He has been strictly ordered to kill the traitor Rodriguez and retrieve a package. Rodriguez is approaching a helicopter, but when the pilot has to evade a Stinger missile, the package falls out of the aircraft. Inside is the BOW, Nix. The creature kills and absorbs the entire UBCS team. Shortly afterward, Tyrant Air is also devoured by Nix. long battle, the survivors are able to destroy the creature and escape from Raccoon City in a UBCS Humvee. Ada Wong also survives. She escapes from the research facility outside the city through the sewers and returns from the mountains. Wesker helped her survive and secure a sample of the G-Virus. After fierce battles, she finally reaches a helicopter and leaves the city with a sample of the G-Virus. Then everything ends. On orders from the government, Raccoon City is wiped out by nuclear missiles. More than 100,000 people die. With that, not only streets, houses and entire neighborhoods disappear, but almost all traces as well, of what Umbrella did there. And of course the Ark Lab still remains. For Leon, Claire, Jill, Ada and a few other survivors, the catastrophe is not over yet. But for Raccoon City itself, this is the end. And yet, remarkably, even this is not the ultimate final echo of this story, because on the ruins of Umbrella's crimes, other groups of people would later build their own power. Raccoon City is destroyed, Umbrella is eventually dismantled, and years later, fresh new names gradually begin to take the place of the old ones. One of them is Victor Gideon, who will later take over Rhodes Hill. But that is already a story for another time. So if you're interested, you can watch the entire story of Rhodes Hill right now in the next video. Thank you for watching, and I would be happy if you click the like button, as this helps me to continue producing such videos. So until next time, take care, adios. Ciao ciao.